curious about the discussion because I tried to look at some of the messages and translate them with Google Translate, but I only have a very rough idea about what's going on.
We usually, our chat has started as a way to share our knowledge management system, and with time it progressed and evolved in something completely different. Today we are discussing not just knowledge management systems, but also such things as philosophy, education, management, time management, motivation, discipline, and every other possible points of interest of any member of our group, of our chat. And this idea of discussion club was born as a way to organize these thoughts and to invite different people with wide range of interests. We have experts in writing, we have experts in philosophy, we have experts in linguistics, and we always discuss with them some problem. For example, with you, I'd like to discuss the knowledge management system as a whole. Why did it emerge? Why did it emerge recently? Because I have a notion on it, but before that, I'd like to share with you my experience, how I got into this knowledge management system and Zettelkasten particularly. Are you interested a little bit? So
that sounds great. Just a short technical question up front. I decided to use my phone because I think the microphone is better. Do you understand me clearly, or shall I swap to the PC?
Excellent. I understand it clearly, and I hear you excellent.
Okay, great.
Okay. When I had been working as a top manager for one of the biggest gas and oil companies in Russia, and 3 years ago I made a choice to switch from management to education. That was strategic choice, and that was my inner calling, as I now understand it. And to do this, I wanted to upgrade my knowledge and methodology, and to learn how to teach children, specifically linguistics. I teach English and sometimes philosophy at universities and sociology, but it's just part-time. When time came to write thesis, I didn't know where to start. I had lots of ideas. I have lots of thoughts, but I couldn't start them. So I started looking for a system that can help me organize my ideas and thoughts. And the first thing that I typed into the Google was how to take notes in Russian, and I couldn't find anything. Then I typed it in English, and can you guess what happened next? I saw your book, How to Take Smart Notes. That's how my journey into knowledge management system has begun, and I still continue to walk on this path and develop and improve my system and develop myself thanks to your book. And later this all evolved, and we've started chat with some people, and now we have 2,000 members who are listening. 200 or 300 of them usually listen to our discussions. So I'm literally had been saved by your book, because I finished my thesis this July and posted, and I had very good reviews on this thesis.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. So can you share how did you come up with the idea of your book? of this?
Sure. So I think it came from multiple sources. The obvious reason is that I've been interested in the theory of Niklas Luhmann for a very long time. So he's one of the most important authors for me, and naturally I got interested in his way of writing, and the Zettelkasten was always mentioned, but never really described. And it was always described as some quirk, but nothing that is really connected to his theory. And he himself has only written very little about the Zettelkasten itself. But the more I learned about it, the more I understood the connection between the complexity of Luhmann's systems theory and the way he organized his notes. Because it became obvious to me that you need a certain system to build up complexity in a way that is not messy. And my frustration with a lot of contemporary sociology was that it seemed to lack complexity, that they always take one aspect of society and organize everything around this one particular aspect. So risk, for example, or you try to characterize a generation by a certain aspect. And to me, it seemed like this is the outcome of a bad note-taking system where you have to reduce the complexity upfront by deciding on a certain characteristic of society or generation, and that helps you to organize all the bits of information. And at the same time, it's a filter. So trying to develop a complex theory myself, I naturally got interested in how to set up a system that allows me to not lose overview. And there are other authors like Arno Schmidt, for example. He's a fiction writer from Germany who also worked with a kind of Zettelkasten. And so it crossed my path multiple times. And I realized that the few descriptions available on the internet were mostly misleading because they treated the system much more like an archive, a collection of sorts, and didn't stress enough the need to thoroughly think through what you're writing down. So people got really interested in the similarities to hyperlinks that was in the 1990s, that the internet became a kind of metaphor for all kinds of things. And that seemed to me misleading as well. So having no book available that I was able to recommend to my students, it was more like a necessity to write something down that I could hand to them. And so I feel the need to write the book. The other angle is that during my research on world disclosure and the question of the role of technology within processes of research I became much more aware of the need to have a system where you can decentralize your ideas in, and not to consider yourself as the center of research. So that is the theoretical background that helped me to describe the principles of the Zettelkasten. And the focus on the book is on the principles, and that's mostly because I think the system itself, it's really simple. It's not difficult to describe, and you only need a few pages. But to put it into practice, you need an understanding of why it works and how to avoid the pitfalls, like turning it into a messy pile of information with no connections that are actually helpful. So I'm coming from two angles to the book. One is the interest in Luhmann itself, and the interest in looking for a connection between the structure of a theory and the methodology behind it. And the second angle is born out of my research. Yeah.
Very interesting. Tell me, please tell me, you how can you describe your framework? How did you research the book and Luhmann's archives? Maybe I don't understand. This is quite a task to accomplish, to understand his system, especially if you didn't say a word about it more than a couple of opinions. Couple times he shared his opinion.
Yeah.
How did he?
Well, in the beginning, I wrote a first draft which I wasn't happy with. That was probably because of the lack of information at that time. And I put it in the drawer and left it there for a couple of years and didn't touch it. And I came back to the manuscript when examples and descriptions popped up because of the research project at the University of Bielefeld that helped me a lot to connect the dots and to understand better. So Johannes Schmidt, who's leading the research group on Luhmann's Zettelkasten, he is a very good source for information. And now we have a completely digitalized version. It's unfortunately only in German at the moment, but you get a very good idea just by looking at the notes. But I think I needed a little bit more information to pick up the project again and to be sure that the description is fitting. Yeah.
When I was looking, I was looking to some system that could help me organize my thoughts before I begin writing a thesis, I stumbled upon different slip methods. It's Crawford slip methods. It's Hemingway was writing the same way using slips. Jack London, and Nabokov also was writing using slips of paper and cards. They all structured their story using cards. I think I've started thinking that this is the great tool to write almost anything.
Yeah.
And not just write anything, but also jumpstart thinking process. How does it help to start thinking process? Maybe when you're thinking how to link different nodes and what this connection means.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right in stressing the thinking part, because I might have promised with the subtitle a little bit that it's mainly a tool for productivity. That is probably why people pick it up in the first place. But what I'm also mostly interested in is how it helps with thinking or can kickstart a thinking process. And I think there are multiple mechanics of the system that triggers it. And the most important one is it allows you to decentralize ideas. So instead of taking an idea and use it as a filter for the information you gather, or a research question you pose up front, and then filter everything that fits into that question, or even the hypothesis, that can quickly become a problem because it's basically setting you up for confirmation bias. And having a system where every idea you put into has to be compared with the most similar ideas decentralizes the idea within a network and forces you to compare seemingly similar nodes for sometimes very small differences. And I think usually systems that rely much more on your memory and brain have the problem that everything you compare within your brain gets a little bit muddled up, because our brain is very good in detecting similarities, but it's not very good in making us aware of differences, especially when they are small. But having in black and white two nodes in front of you, you can use your brain to detect the differences. And that is very easy to do when you have them in front of you. So I think that counterbalances confirmation bias quite a bit, and also forces you to be more rigorous with concepts and definitions. So a lot of the work I put into writing is explaining to myself the difference between concepts, and it strengthens over time the relations between concepts, which will lead, I believe, necessarily to some form of theory, because I understand theory as the systematic description of relations between concepts. And writing that down means you make these relations explicit. And not having a system that keeps track of the relations between concepts comes always with the risk of looking at a particular concept with a particular perspective and another concept with a different perspective, which might appear compatible, but wouldn't be compatible if you take the time to make the relationship explicit and try to integrate it into something that is systematic, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, it completely makes sense to me, because when I first started my Zettelkasten, my knowledge base, not specific, I don't know to what it involved right now, because I don't have IDs. I just have timestamps. I put the title so I can understand immediately what the note inside this file is. So I'll call it not just Zettelkasten, but knowledge management system. At the beginning, I created one note where I created a map of this is called mock map of contents. There are lots of information on the internet about it, but now I completely cancel it. I don't use mocks. I don't use tags. I don't use anything. It's just my basis is just plain, and I use only connection between nodes. And now I can see when I open a whole web of my notes. If I'm using Obsidian, and I can see on the graph around which topic they all are revolving, so I can see my interest lies right now. It's at this point. Maybe I should dig deeper.
Well, that's interesting. Maybe that's so. I'm using Rome Research, and the graph is not that great. So I think Obsidian has a much better visualization. So maybe the visualization with the graph really helps you to do something I need some kind of MOCs for. So I feel the need to give myself not an overview over everything, but an overview over a particular cluster or a particular topic or question, even though these MOCs changes over time. So I replace them or change. These are the nodes that evolve. Normally, permanent nodes stay as they are. If I correct something, I would add it to it. But these MOCs are usually, for me, the place where I think about the interconnectedness. But it might really very well be that your system was using Obsidian and having a better graph function might be a functional equivalent to that.
Yeah, that's why I thought when you create MOC inside Obsidian, you get those flowers, as I call them, with one idea that from which different ideas are spreading, and they can connect to each other. And those flowers are distracting me from looking into not so vivid connections. Just maybe some connections that is lying deeper. I need to dive in and think more on the topic.
It's interesting. I never heard the expression flower in this context, but I like it much better than node or MOC.
Flower, because it looks like dandelion. I think I don't know, so something like that. Yeah. Oh, you mentioned permanent notes. Tell me, please, can you share? Did you get any feedback from the readers of your book?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I get loads of feedback. Do you have something specific in mind about permanent notes, or?
Yeah, because I'm thinking we have a professor in our group. He teaches critical thinking and mass media theories at the University of St. Petersburg, and we discussed with him some concept, and he is interested if you had any feedback that was interpreted or had been interpreted not as you planned it. For example, permanent notes or literature notes. For example, in researching circles, in scientific circles and academic circles, we and me too, I do specifically, I separate literature notes and permanent notes. Literature notes, they are thoughts or from the authors, and permanent notes, they're my thoughts that had been created from the literature notes. Maybe some readers misinterpreted it, or maybe something like that.
Yeah. Well, actually, I expected much more critical feedback on this difference because I'm not very clear in the book about this separation, because literature notes are somehow in between fleeting notes and permanent notes. And you're right, the distinction is best understood by seeing literature notes as notes on the ideas of someone else, and permanent notes as notes on your own ideas. So I expected more critical feedback on the difference, but actually most people seem to figure that out quite quickly, that it's more the problem sometimes that of where to put comments and ideas about the literature. Do they belong in the literature note section or the permanent note section? And what is probably interesting for you in the context of critical thinking, I think the biggest difference, and this is something I really hoped for, is that many people, which I gather from the feedback I received, start with writing about the ideas of others. So in the beginning, the emphasis lied on how do I deal with literature, and I'm treating the literature as something that I write about and that I might make comments on. But having the separation to permanent notes forces you as a reader, or us as readers, to swap from the frame which is given by the book we read or the article we read into a different frame, and that is the frame we develop our own. And writing permanent notes feels strangely unfamiliar for many people in the beginning, me included, because you develop ideas in dialogue with previous ideas of your own. You use the literature, the data, and everything that comes from the outside and from others to inform this process and to enrich the process. But having the separation between literature notes and permanent notes forces you to really focus on your own ideas. And that is something I believe we are not taught in school. And this is where the critical thinking part might come into. So I don't see critical thinking in the sense I understand it as being critical about things I read. I think that's a common understanding. So I make a comment about the book I'm reading. I put my own opinion to it. This is not what I have in mind. What I have in mind is taking what others say and present to me as seriously as possible, not jumping into being critical about that, not jumping into distance myself to it, but taking it on board as honestly and fully as possible, and then making the switch and change my own thinking as far as it needs to be to do justice to the information I just took on board. I think this is a different idea to critical thinking as it is often taught in school.
Critical thinking isn't taught at school at all. At least it isn't taught at the university. to my pity, because if I've been taught critical thinking, I would have changed many things in my life, or didn't do many not so clever things.
Yeah. Thank you for bursting my bubble. I think you're absolutely right.
But about this hardship of writing permanent notes, I have a notion that it is due because we can't ask questions. For example, now I have been recently reading Plato's dialogues, and I could not put myself into reading because I didn't know where to start. Then a friend of mine advised me a structural a structural approach to Plato's dialogues. So I have easy level, medium level, hard level, and very hard level of his dialogues. So where I need some kind of advisor who can help me to understand it completely. And I now read easy and medium level, and I couldn't start reading because I didn't know where to look. It's dialogue. He talks. He expresses his opinion. He changes somebody's opinion. But as soon as I found a question, I started creating permanent notes without even touching literature notes. And the question is, what Plato is teaching me? And that's a very hard thing to answer.
Yeah. You're stressing a very important point, and that is the role of questions, and that questions do evolve, and they might start with a simple question like, what is Plato teaching me? And then the question will evolve. I try to remind my students that these kind of simple questions are legitimate. So, for example, the question which is often posed as a rhetorical one, why is he writing things in such a complicated manner? And if you ask it as a rhetorical question, it just isn't a question at all. It just means he could put it much more easily, simple. But taking that question seriously means, okay, let's assume there is a reason why the text I'm reading is really difficult to understand. Could it be, for example, that the topic is difficult, or that the author lacked the vocabulary to put it into simple words, either because it's an obscure topic or the vocabulary wasn't developed at that time. So this could be a very good question to approach a text. And it's something I try to encourage the students always to do, to take the first initial rhetorical question, which is most often just an expression of frustration, and turn it into a serious one.
I always teach my students at school, and sometimes bachelors who are attached to me to do their project, to ask silly questions. I tell them, look for silly question. It will put the groundwork for fundamental questions and profound questions, such as how does woodpecker's tongue is working, or why the sky is blue, and work out from this point to more complex topics.
So do you have silly question about the book.
Actually, I had one when I started reading, and it sounded like this: why it is so complex? And when I read the book completely, and I reread it twice already, I found that complexity brings simplicity. That's my overview of this. Why it's so complex? Why his system is so complex? Luhmann's, I mean.
Yeah, I think you're right that there is a connection between complexity and simplicity, just as there's a relationship between easiness and complicatedness. I don't even know if these are actual English words, but you know what I mean.
Yes, completely.
I think working with the Zettelkasten itself is a way of dealing with complexity. So you build up complexity, and the moment you feel, oh, this is getting out of hand, I lose my orientation. You can reduce the complexity by inventing a new concept, inventing a new MOC, or giving yourself an overview over the structure. And the reduction of complexity via this kind of means, like an overview over a topic, then allows you to build up complexity again in parts of this structure. So on a subtopic, for example. But as the idea of how to structure a topic, a question, etc., is also only an idea on a note, it can always be replaced by a different structure later. While anything that hardwires a structure into the system, the typical example would be the folder structure with subfolders, etc., will become very quickly complicated. And if something is complicated, you have to put a lot of effort into untangling it. You cannot reduce the complicatedness like you can reduce complexity. And that is, of course, an idea taken from Luhmann's theory of social systems. And that's probably a very common idea nowadays, but it was really enlightening for me. And it is an idea that I keep coming back to over and over again. And that is, complexity builds up by itself, but like an evolutionary process, you always have moments of complexity reduction. And understanding modern society means understanding the relationship between mechanisms of reducing complexity, which in turn allows complexity to build up in pockets of it until they become complex as well and need new mechanisms, inventions of complexity reduction. And I think technology works in a way of keeping complexity reductions in place without our need to understand them. And that is often something that is, I think, overlooked, and complexity is either seen as a sign for some ingenuity or a sign for a lack of clarity. But I think that is then most often confused with something that is just complicated.
Yeah, actually, when I read your book second time, I understood one thing, that I don't understand how can I find the idea behind all the words that are written in any other book or in any other article. And I started looking into this, and in time I came up with I read, after second run of your book, I read 3 more books that helped me to understand how can I decompose the idea to the simple one, around which one every other word, every other idea has been built. The first book is the classic already, Mortimer Adler, How to Read a Book. It gives you overview. Second book is 5 Elements of Effective Thinking. I don't remember the authors. They are two mathematicians. Yeah, 2 mathematicians. And the third one is Tony Busan's Mind Map. Mind mapping technology. And now all these 4 books, including yours, helped me to decompose almost any book I read or any article I read. Yeah, of course, sometimes the articles is harder than I thought. For example, right now I'm researching the problem-based learning. It's something different from what Kilpatrick and Dewey were proposing, and it's based on the problems and an obstacle course which students should overcome. And with each level, the problem evolves. And I'm looking into and researching this at the moment, and the articles, so they are very simple. There are no hard words on difficult collocations or difficult ideas. To decompose them, I have to spend time.
Yeah, it sounds almost like there is a need for a book that combines the core ideas of these 4 mentioned books. Are you planning on writing one?
I'm sharing my ideas in chat with our community, and I have a blog where I post some when I publish some posts, and maybe I was thinking to organize my ideas around the core idea, how to work with information, so you can add value to it. So it won't stay information for long, and it can be turned into knowledge, and knowledge could be turned into something that you can apply in any field, and with different conditions, in different situations, like that.
You will publish it in Russia, I assume?
Actually, I was thinking to publish some articles in Scopus, maybe something like that. I start with problem solving, and reading a book is a problem solving. I think it's the same. The hardest book I read this year is called Times of the Magicians. I don't remember the author, but he's German. He written this book. He has written this book in 2018, and this book describes lives of 4 philosophers: Benjamin, Cassirer. I believe you know this. And when I read it, my notes, I finished it reading in January, and I sorted my notes for 2 months. It's such he had such deep ideas that I could not wrap my mind around them. So I took time to to work them out, and took time to read additional books such as philosophical tractatus or philosophical investigation, because I liked Wittgenstein's and Heidegger's idea the most, and Heidegger's book Being and Time. I don't remember in English how it sounds. And after that, I understood what he was talking about, and this is problem solving. I was solving the problem. What the author of the Times of the Magician tried to tell me, and he was actually, in my opinion, he was actually answering, posing a question. Actually, posing a question: what philosophy can teach us, and how we can wait a second, I'm looking for a word in my mind, how we can connect philosophy and real life. And this is, I couldn't find an answer in his book and in Wittgenstein's books and in Heidegger's book, and I'm still thinking about it. This is what I mean by problem solving. I see one obstacle, I overcome it. I see second obstacle, I overcome it. I see third obstacle, I overcome it. And first step in my research is to write an article, how I think problem solving could help us in this work.
Yeah, I had a similar experience reading that book. Zeit der Zauberer in German. It's a pretty direct translation, and I think it works because he lets the reader know what problem the authors are working on, and is showing similarities between quite different philosophers, and yeah, it's a frame I find very helpful, just to read something with the question, okay, what kind of question is the author trying to give an answer to? And I have to admit, looking at the book in my shelf, it's still mostly unprocessed. So I haven't really taken many notes, except for a few on Heidegger, which I just needed for a project. So it's a good reminder to go back to that.
Actually, I had two questions. I found two questions in this book that helped me now to process every other book. First one is, what can I know? And the second one, and how should I live? I don't know who of the four philosophers posed those questions, but I transformed them into what did I learn right now, and how should I apply this? And every book and every article that I read, I try to answer these two questions.
All right. What can I know, and how should I live?
How should I live? Yes. What can I know, and how should I live? Actually, they're simple, but they're complex in the same time.
Yeah, it's at least one of Kant's questions. What can I know? What must I do? What may I hope for?
Do you have an idea for, I don't know, maybe it's some bias, my bias, but for last 2 years, I have been noticing words knowledge management and Zettelkasten more and more. And do you have an idea why this the idea of knowledge management is emerging, has been emerging recently?
Yeah, well, you have to take it with a grain of salt, because I'm I'm staying in the same bubble. So to me, it looks the same, like it picked up quite a bit, and it's becoming more and more, being more and more discussed. But of course, that also might be just related to the way I filter the information. But provided that it does pick up, I think it's not a coincidence that it is at the same time when higher education and the formal certificate-based career is in a bit of a turmoil or even a crisis. So much more emphasis is put on lifelong learning, trainings, and the certificates you get from school and university are now distinguished less and less by the formal standards and more by the names of the universities and soft standards. And you have institutions popping up like Lambda schools who don't care about these formal requirements at all, and instead teach skills that are so visible to employers that they become very attractive students with a very different incentive system, because the school only earns its fees as a percentage of the actual income the student is making in the years after graduation. And also you have the rise of international standardized tests like PISA, TIMSS, etc., which are also not bound to national curriculums anymore, and allows students, pupils, parents, and teachers as well to change their curriculum with an eye towards these standardized tests. So it becomes much more a preparation for something that is not developed by the institution itself. So all these phenomena, I think, are part of a substantial shift in education, at least in higher education. And that brings the obvious need to pave your own way through the material you're studying, and also makes it a little bit more obvious that it's actually about understanding what you're doing and not teaching and training for a particular test you are given within a class. So I think there is a connection between this shift in higher education and the need for more personalized ways of learning, which can be tweaked to your own needs. But also probably the change in technology is a big reason, because up until now, most of the textbooks are very linear, structured, and that is very much at odds with the way the next generation grew up with collecting information from the internet, which is never structured in this way textbooks are coming from. So I feel the new generation, the young generation, is used to a much more non-hierarchical way of approaching learning and knowledge, and therefore feel the need to structure their own ideas in a more similar way. And so maybe it was just about time that probably it was just time to approach it in a different way.
10 years ago, I wrote a PhD thesis on economics, and the topic was about innovations. And the main idea around which I structured all my work is that innovation needs time. It should be delivered in a timely manner. And I actually agree with you. Because I had a saying at school that I always use to my students. Guys, I am just simple teacher. Actually, 10, 20 or 30 years ago, I was a Prometheus with fire in my hands. Now, my fire extinguished and it's just spark, dying spark, while you have in your hands a Jedi sword. Take your phones and find any information you like and answer to any question you are interested in. So I'm actually maybe the only teacher at school who gives student chance to use phones on my lessons, in my classes. But they can't use it for messaging and surfing the net. They have to use it to find necessary information.
Right. And what is your explanation for the rising interest in this personal knowledge management systems?
Actually, I was thinking quite hard on the topic, and I not so long ago, maybe 6 months ago, I had been discussing it on philosophy faculty in my alma mater, at my alma mater, and my philosophy teacher told me, if you look closely, you'll see that information doesn't have value. Only knowledge has value, and information doesn't equal value. Not equals knowledge. Information, just information. And in order to create knowledge, you have to work hard, and you have to have skills to transform information into knowledge, and then the knowledge that you can apply to something in real life. And she gave me some book. I don't remember the name of this book, but it was, or maybe it was an article. It was about information explosion. Epstein had an idea that since 2012 we have been generating 18 exabytes of information, and each year the amount of information increases on 30%. And this poses the real question. We don't have anymore risk of dying from famine, but the human being lives only 70 years, and with all this information around us, we have to work out to become human. We have to sort the information that we need. We have to structure it, and we have. I don't remember how did he write it. Is it possible to human being to become human in 70 years with all this information around him? I think this is what forces people or my surrounding to look into knowledge management systems. They want to become human. We all want to become something meaningful, to become a person, to have personality, to have our own ideas, not the ideas of somebody else.
Yeah, I can relate to that. It's something others before the rise of these personal knowledge management systems have said in a similar way about autobiographical writing, but also about writing in general. So Mishel Foucault describes his own writing as a way to change himself. Others have written about the need to write to, I'm not sure if I encountered the expression of becoming human, but to figure out what it means to be human. This is something a professor I very much admire in philosophy of education, Jan Massielein from University of Leuven, sometimes stress that it is about the question on, okay, what makes a human human? And some great works of art help us answering that question, or are serious in posing the question. He had the beautiful films of the Dardenne brothers in mind. And I think I myself need this kind of writing down my own ideas, not only to slow down and to filter the amount of information, but also to get more clarity about priorities, to distinguish the important questions from the less important ones. And this is never a finished project, but it's always part of the writing process, to give myself account of what am I doing here and what am I doing with my time, which is limited. So I like the idea that it is more than just about information processing.
It's finding yourself, I think, something like that.
Yeah, finding yourself, and maybe also changing yourself. I especially think that the decentralized way of writing something down can be a way of getting a distance to what is all too familiar. Bataille worked with the Zettelkasten, and that's really interesting because he in a way he used it as I think he worked with Zettelkasten, if I'm not mistaken. But sorry, you can help me. The Death of the Author is written by whom?
Death of the. Oh yeah, I know. Let me think. Death of. Oh yeah, that's
Roland Barth.
Yes, Roland Barт.
Yeah, Roland Barth.
Yeah.
Yeah. In Roland Barth, after he wrote The Death of the Author and mocked autobiographical writing as a kind of fiction where the author is always in the center of the story and etc. He started to use a kind of Zettelkasten with snippets of his own life, sometimes written by himself, but sometimes also written by others, like letters he received. And he rediscovered autobiographical writing because now he can integrate the different options of looking at his life with the lens of not just by himself from the present, but also from himself from the past and others onto his own life, which enabled him to see the value in autobiographical writing, because it doesn't have to be this fiction of an author who is looking back onto his life as if he could see everything from that perspective.
Actually, I'm remembering we discussed Rolан Barт with my philosophy teacher, and she was adamant about this, that he interrogated culture through books, through other mediums such as leaflets, discussions and conversation, and he tried to expose how bourgeois society valued materialistic things, and I think that's why he tried to, through autobiography, decompose everything that is valued to main idea, some kind of main idea. Maybe I haven't read his books, but I just read his lectures, and I was thinking that he detested bourgeois society.
I'm not an expert on him either. So what are the main discussion points in your Telegram group when it comes to personal knowledge systems or Zettelkasten in particular?
We're usually discussing how to organize. For example, I can tell you the recent discussions that we had yesterday. One of the members of our group asked how he should estimate time that he uses to structure and create his Zettelkasten system, because he thought that maybe research time be included into this estimation, or just the time which he uses to write some ideas and to connect them and something like that. On this, I shared my idea that first of all, we have to find a goal for what we are setting our Zettelkasten. For me, it's to have something logical and structured, so to structure my information and in meaningful way, so I can use it later to write something. It may be a part of the research project, and I put it and post it online on my blog, or maybe it's part of my thesis, which I later integrate into the complete work. And we discussed how he should estimate time that he uses, because he counted that 80% of the time that he uses to 80% from 100%, 80% is thinking and decomposing ideas, and only 20% is writing ideas into Zettelkasten and connecting them there. Before that, we had a discussion on the topic how to decompose the article. what major points should be included, what information should be included in Zettelkasten, and how we should read the article. By the way, we have a member of our group who shared his ideas that he likes slow reading, and he wrote quite a big post where he demonstrated what ideas did he get when he read slowly, and stopped after each page and answered important questions, and how these important questions led him to see bigger picture. So we discussed Zettelkasten in this way: how to organize our knowledge, how to work with knowledge, how to integrate it into system, and sometimes we discuss what systems do we use. By the way, we have lots of different technical things, such as Zotero, Devon-think. Today we were discussing how to organize all information in one place. Obsidian, Rome Research, Remnote, Notion, etc. With the technical question is the simplest question, I think, right now. The hardest is the idea and how to work with this information.
And are your experience on how much time you spend on thinking, note-taking, writing, composing an article similar, or have you done a kind of poll? Because I would be very interested in the similarities and differences. I wouldn't even be able to give it a number, but what are your experience?
In my experience, I have an idea that thinking is painful. So, in order for my article to even start working with article, I collect lots of information. I read lots of articles, and I read them very slowly, very deliberately. I have a way of three-level reading. First time I read it, I'm just skipping through the article, see all the arguments, see all the conclusions, see all numbers that I use. The second reading is more detailed. I'm trying to get my head around the main idea of each argument, and if it sounds similar, or if it touches some notes within myself, or with my ideas, or with my thoughts, maybe, then I mark them. And during the third reading, I process them. I find them the way in my Zettelkasten. I find to what it could be connected, and I explain this connection. And I estimated that this work takes hours. Sometimes days. For example, right now I mentioned already that I'm working on the problem-based learning, and I read for the last week. I read only 4 articles, and I decomposed to the main ideas only 2 articles. And connected them to something that I already have, intuitive science. I have ideas about that all children are intuitive scientists, and obstacle and problem learning helps them to develop this scientific thinking. So I connected this idea to this one, and it takes, if I type with all my 10 fingers, typing 5 pages takes me typing 5 pages. It usually takes 1 hour and 1 hour and a half without proofreading and corrections. But working on the information that I use takes me 10 to 12 hours. It's usually much more. So I'm thinking more than I'm writing. For example, I can think whole day. I can think for maybe 4 or 6 hours. I thought I read something. I went with my family, with my son out, or played with my daughter. I discussed some topics at home, or called my friends, or chatted, or entered some discussion on Telegram, and while doing this, I'm still thinking. And it can take from 5. It runs on the background, in the background of my head, and when idea pops, I go to the laptop, open it, and type it. Typing is faster. Thinking is hard part. It takes 80% thinking, 20% typing. It's the same for me, I think. What about you?
I think it comes in different phases. So I sometimes very much focus on reading, especially when I'm reading a book on a topic I'm not that familiar with, or which is quite dense. Then I sometimes spend days just focusing on the book, and very little thinking in terms of following my own ideas happens. With the kind of books and articles I deliberately read for a specific question in mind, it's very different. It kind of changes that I spend the majority of the time noting down ideas, thinking about a certain question, and then once in a while going back to the literature, hoping that it helps me get through a block. And when I'm working on a manuscript, I spend most of the time focusing on the argument, what the reader might need to know. And once in a while it sparks ideas I write down, but just as fleeting notes, without going into details or postponing the thinking of it. And then there are sometimes the phases which I like the most, where I'm immersed in a problem that I cannot get out of my head and don't want to get out of my head, and which follows me around, where I spend very little time reading, or only short bursts of reading, because they tend then to trigger ideas, and where I spend a lot of time doing things that do not occupy my attention very much. So like having a walk. And I remember these times, especially during my doctoral thesis, in the final stages, where I felt, okay, it's almost in my grasp, the solution to the problem. And this was, in terms of thinking, certainly the most exciting time in my career, because I felt the solution is really in my thinking. The solution won't be found in a text somewhere. The solution is in reach, but it depends on my ability to connect the dots. And I found that extremely satisfying. And at the same time, it's very rare. And I feel at the moment I spend way too little time on thinking like this. But I trust that it will have its time again. And so to me, it really comes in phases. There's a phase of reading, immersing myself in literature, then the phase of writing things down to clarify, filter the information, and then coming up with new, more interesting questions, and then thinking and writing it down. So it's difficult to put a number onto it because I don't have a daily routine which is similar every time. So it's more in between weeks or month that there are bigger differences, often, obviously, depending on the time of the university term, which is sometimes a little bit too distracting.
I have the same experience that when I'm thinking on something on some topic or on some problem, I usually don't notice time. Do not notice time. For example, I'm trying to when I invite somebody to our discussion club, I usually spend lots of time thinking about problems that I'd like to discuss with the guest. So the discussion would be meaningful and interesting for both parties. For example, with you, the first idea came to my mind is ask you about Zettelkasten system, but it's so simple and so naive and so surface. It's on the surface, but idea about talking knowledge society, it's much more interesting. And actually, I have we are discussing, and I hope it's interesting to you too. I have some insights on this idea, and you mentioned writing a book or something like that. I had an idea, but it wasn't even formulated. But while discussing it with you, I know what to include in my I don't know, I can't call it a book. I'm not a writer. I can't even consider myself a writer, because my scientific advisor says to me, when, Rustam, will you write in scientific language? Your language is vulgar and suited only for blog posts. You're a scientist, write correctly. So writing thesis was a nightmare to put all the words into correct form, so it will sound scientifically correctly. But actually, this is my problem. This is one of my biggest problems. That's why I'm missing. I have a gap here now. My scientific advisor, she's 72 years old. She's professor in pedagogy and linguistics, and she says, Rustam, take a gap year and work out 3 or 4 interesting articles with which you can come back to me, and I see if your scientific speech has improved. After that, I will take you into my PhD program. I will advise you to every person possible, but not with this vulgar language, please. So it's actually a good thing. I took this gap year, and right now I'm writing. That's why I hope Zettelkasten will help me write articles. My idea here is that when I'm thinking on a problem that I'd like to discuss, or I'd like to find a solution to, I don't notice the flow of time. Last time, I spent 4 hours thinking, and I didn't even notice it. I was thinking, I don't know about what. Maybe some project. I read Kilpatrick and Dewey, these 2 authors, their project-based learning, and read Lev Vygotsky, his theory of actions. And I found some similarities, but something didn't feel right. And I was thinking, what was it? And that's 4 hours helped me to see that project-based learning is quite different from problem-based learning. And I saw these differences, but it took me 4 hours. And then 7 or 8 more hours to find articles and information that I needed. And then 4 hours to read them properly and decompose them. And I even haven't done it in full yet. So yes, thinking, I usually don't follow, don't register how much time do I spend, but do not observe it. But in my experience, it's a lot. It's more than I spend time in writing.
And what is the idea that you just had during our interview that you will include in your manuscript? Call it manuscript. It can become a book.
Maybe that you can't teach people how to create or set up knowledge management system without teaching them specific skills as decomposing ideas, looking for ideas, reading correctly, skills for that can help you create mind map or diagramming, skills and experience for asking questions. This is one of the main problems, to find a question that you can find that you are looking answer for. Sometimes when I read, I don't know what I'm reading. Actually, not like this. I understand what I'm reading, but I don't know what question does the author pose and puts in front of me, and I'm sometimes looking for this question, and after that I'm going back to find an answer. So this idea that knowledge management system, it's not just knowledge management system, it's complex, it's set of skills that you need to develop first to set up your knowledge system. Because before I started my knowledge system, before I read your book, I already knew how to ask questions.
Yeah, I think at the same time, it's not that you have to acquire the skills first and then set up the system, but setting up the system can actually help you acquiring the skills needed, because the technology gives you a structure within. It becomes easier to focus on the skill set. For example, the book you mentioned earlier about the 5 principles of effective thinking by these 2 mathematicians, I also forgot the names from. One of the skills they stress, which I repeatedly come back to as being incredibly important and at the same time incredibly obvious, is paying attention to what is actually there instead of getting distracted by our imagination of what is there. They describe it on the example of describing artworks and how to unlearn seeing our interpretation of a painting, but instead actually focusing and being able to describe the colors, the shapes, the forms, and how difficult it is to pay attention to what is actually there. And I think working with a good writing system that, for example, forces you to compare your notes on a text with the paragraph you took notes on, is so full of little feedback loops that it is like a training ground for the skill of paying attention, because you notice, okay, I wrote down this, but actually what's in the text is something slightly different, probably less exciting, but it's like a training ground for this kind of skills. And the writing itself, obviously, with the feedback loop that you have to read it later and still understand it, so you get feedback on how well you put it. Yeah, so I fully agree, but I also think that the system and the technology can help you with improving the skills, and I see it as something that is something that won't come to an end, but it's something you improve on constantly, without an end in sight. Yeah.
Actually, next year in September, I was planning. I'm planning to start at school the same kind of discussion club that we started in our community, and we also started a book club here where we read some books. Now it's Diana Halpern's Critical Thinking, an introduction, knowledge, thought and knowledge, an introduction into critical thinking, and where we decompose each chapter. We spend usually 1 hour every Thursday in the evening, and we decompose and we formulate main ideas from this. From chapters, and I'm thinking to start the same project at school in September. And first one, discussion club, will teach children the reflective competences, so they would be able to ask questions and find interesting questions. And the second one, book club, will help them to read books properly. I already discussed it with my scientific advisor at the university, and we agreed that this could teach them metacognition skills. So what you're talking about, that not just learn skills, but learning skills while applying them, that's the main idea, what I'd like to teach my children next year as an extracurricular activity at school. So this sounds familiar.
That sounds interesting. I'm still struggling myself to distinguish helpful skills that can be taught, certain metacognitive skills, and a certain understanding of critical thinking that either doesn't work in the way we hope it works, or could actually be counterproductive. So Daniel T. Willingham wrote a very short piece on the problems of critical thinking courses and the need to engage with the content you're supposed to be critical about, and he shows quite convincingly that the ability to think critically about a subject depends on the familiarity with the subject above anything else. So that someone who's able to think highly critical or very critical within his area of expertise can become like a child when he overestimates his critical thinking abilities and engaging a subject he is not that familiar with. But he also mentioned that there are certain metacognitive skills that can be transferred and taught independently of it. But it made me wonder where we have to be careful with the promise of critical thinking skills per se. And the other question I have in mind is about the dangers or the problems with a certain understanding of being critical. And that might not apply to this kind of ideas of reading critically in the sense you mean, but probably more in the sense of academic critical reading of literature. Rita Felsky wrote a nice book on the limits of critique, which I very much liked, and she is writing on a certain kind of critical reading, especially within the field of literature and literature critique, that became almost synonymous to reading well, but with the tendency of only seeing what we apply as our critical filter, and which became an obstacle to engage in the subject itself, and not paying enough attention to what is actually written about. And so she describes a certain attitude of being critical as an obstacle to the shared experience that literature can conduct, or where literature is about sharing an experience, it can get in the way of participating onto it. So these are the two bits of wonder I have in mind when it comes to how to set up a course of critical skills or critical reading skills, and where could it go wrong and what we need to take into account. Have you thought about the dangers of critical thinking in this term?
Of course, I've been thinking not just about how will children process information, and how they in what light they accept word critical. So will they accept critical as asking questions, or will they accept it as critical as opposing? This is the main of the ideas. This is
Right.
this is very important question. That's why I was thinking to structure this class around the idea of searching for the question that that author tries to ask us, or asks himself, and looking for the arguments that he mentions during his work, and to the conclusion. So the idea about it, not just teach you how to think critically. In my opinion, it is almost impossible. You have to cultivate a skill by yourself, but simple skills as to find not the answer but the question. This is harder thing, and it's harder in one way, and it's safer in the other. It doesn't mean what you think. Just find the question. What question does he puts in front, or did he put in front of us? The author.
I think that's really the crucial bit, and that's a really good approach, because looking for the question makes you also aware of the framing of the article or the bit you're reading. And often the question isn't explicitly stated, but you become aware of the framing. And sometimes the question changes. And it also helps me to look critical at my own writing. So I always ask myself, am I still trying to answer the same question, or do I need to open a new chapter because the question has changed, or it's a sub question? So I think that's a really good approach.
I had a very illustrious case. In this May, I read to the children of fifth grade, the story of Domino. It's a British writer writes short stories about animals and their experience, and I read them, not just read them from the book. I read them with intonation. I dramatize. I use drama while reading. We try this in English and in Russian, so they can understand the beauty of English and the beauty of Russian and compare them, so they can enrich themselves culturally. So while I was reading, there was a situation, this story, when a small boy killed the fox. So the fox won't kill the chickens and hens, and one of the children asked why the boy killed the small fox, and the other girl said because this fox will eat would have eaten the chickens and hens, and the boy wouldn't have anything to eat. And the third boy, the third child, asked, and why was the boy right? Had he been right? Did he have a moral right to kill a small fox? That's when a real discussion had started in the classroom. So at this point, I thought about not just teaching them critical thinking, but I don't know, showing them or maybe directing them to the question that could be asked and finding the answer after that. That's the main idea that I have in mind.
That sounds good.
Wait a second. Something. Oh, yeah, right. So, Sönke, we have spent almost 2 hours together. Tell me, I almost always ask this question in privately or during our discussion. Was this discussion in some way helpful for you?
It was definitely helpful in 2 ways, and the first way is that you reminded me of the question of critical thinking, and that I still haven't written about it, even though it's on my mind for a long time now. And in the second way, it reminded me of being much more serious in following my own questions, because I kind of lost a little bit track of the interesting questions because I was so bogged down in the description of the system. And so I'm very thankful of the way you conducted the interview, because it's not just about repeating the same talking points I'm usually asked about, but leading the interview to the actually interesting questions where I feel to answer them decently, I need to take pen and paper and write them down, or the keyboard.
So we are waiting next book by you.
Yeah, I very much hope to make a little bit progress on that. Have you found ideas within the interview? So may I pose the question back to you?
Of course, let's call it this. That's why I'd like to call it not interview, but discussion. We should share the way to share our ideas. Actually, yes, I posed the question in front of myself, but I actually wrote it. Dangers of teaching critical thinking or metacognition skills at school, and how to maybe, I don't know, how to not make mistake of teaching wrong thing children. And maybe, and not maybe, that's definitely, I'll write something that could be applied, so people who comes to who joins us in the chat on Telegram could use as a framework for building their knowledge system. I had in mind already, and we already had registered domain for this kind of thing, where we can share all the ideas, structure all the information that we gather from the chat, and there are quite few insights. So everybody who wants to build their Zettelkasten system can use. And to this question, I'm sorry to say this, Sönke, but your book is a starting point, but it's not enough.
That sounds good to me.
So that's all, I think. If you don't have anything in mind, maybe you have something to ask, or maybe you have something to tell me. I enormously happy that you joined us this Sunday afternoon and spent with us almost 2 hours. That was very interesting 2 hours, and I have still lots of work to do to transcribe our discussion, to set timestamps, and to share it with the community. And I think around 200 or 300 people will listen to it, and will join us in short order.
It was a pleasure, and thank you very much for the invite. Please let me know if you publish something on critical thinking in English that I can read, and I hope that the Russian translation of my book comes out within this year, I think. And yeah, let's keep in touch.
By the way, who is translating? Who is publishing your book? Do you know?
Yes, I know, and it slipped my mind. I will send you the
Alpina, maybe, or MIF, or MIF.
I'll send it to you via email, because it's it would be embarrassing if I get my publisher's name wrong.
Oh, okay. Because I had I was thinking that we didn't have any information of on the topic of translation of your book translating. We didn't have any information, and I was thinking that in August. In the end of August, I'll have some time, and I wanted to translate it myself. I have skills to do it, especially with modern machine learning translators that could help me to do this and save me for creative work. But if it's already in, if the work is already in progress, then I'll wait.
Yeah, I'm not able to tell you the name of the translator, him or herself, but the publisher is Mann Ivanov Ferber.
MIF, yes, MIF, yes,
MIF. Okay,
yes,
so that,
yes.
yeah, I have no release date yet, but they wanted to get it done as soon as possible and within this year for sure.
It will be huge success, believe me, in Russian, because actually we don't have in Russia, in Russian language, anything that touches the topic of knowledge management system, and especially Zettelkasten, because we have lots of articles that are translated, that are copyrighted from mostly from your book. All information that we have around about Zettelkasten system in Russian, it's some piece and bits from your book, some extracts, some translations, some key points and principles, but nothing structural and whole.
Yeah, I'm really curious how that works out. It seems like it's always an informal community of people who are interested in the subject who initiated the contact to publishers. So it's the same with the Chinese translation, which came out just yesterday, that the initiative came from a community, an informal community, and the publisher then got hold of it. And so it's really nice to be able to participate in the discussions through the translation. So it opens up a window into a different world for me, and I very much like that about the book, because it brings me into contact with interesting new ideas and interesting people. That's really nice. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much again, Sönke. See you around, and I'll keep in touch with you, and I can share my ideas on problem-based learning and the thing that I'm planning to teach at school next year.
Great. Thank you. Have a good Sunday, Russell.
Yeah, thank you. The same to you, Sönke. Thank you. See you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.